Play It Forward, Mitchell Slan. Genre-specific horror, writer-director, watched Balloon, very creepy. Mitchell, would you like to introduce anything about yourself or the movie before we begin?
Sure. My name is Mitchell Slan. I'm a writer director. We've been making horror films since 2016, I believe, out here in Los Angeles. And Balloon was the first short that I ever really put a lot of my, love and effort into. And I was really wanted to be a banger or really pop, if you want to call it that. And so I just can't believe that years later, it's still kind of making its rounds and we're still talking about it. So I'm very, very excited about that.
Yeah, you pulled it
Yeah.
off really well. The timing of a
Thank you.
lot of the stuff, the genre, I guess the theme, the topic, is really relevant, I think, to a lot of people. Um, and I guess what I mean by that is, the trauma of childhood. That's it. There's some traumatic event in childhood, and that's, the coming of age kind of process for all of us. And there are multiple traumas. This trauma happens to be around a clown and balloons, and the main character trying to get over her fear of balloons through a very, I guess, avant-garde, risky, non-typical therapy session, and it ends up backfiring on her. And with Play It Forward, I really dig into the meat of the content of the story, and that's where I believe the heart of the artistry of filmmaking and storytelling lies. So this story, um you know the theme as I see it, and then the theme as you see it, is where I'd like to discuss.
Sure.
But before we talk about theme, I almost skipped over the very first question and Play It Forward. It's, where did this story come from within your life experience?
Sure. Well, it's funny because like at the time we had been homeless in Los Angeles. We had been like trying to just kind of, all survive as artists. We were just brand new. And I just had this, I was sitting there and I remember I was trying to do my laundry in this really like freaky like laundromat. And I remember seeing there like some rerun of Oprah. And she was talking about how she was diagnosed with global which is like the fear of balloons. And like at the time I was trying to like, I was like, I need to make a short that can show I can make a scary movie. I really just need to get myself out there. And that something about that just triggered to me, it just hit me hard. And when I was a kid, I used to like play in my backyard with my sister, and there were times our parents would just like they would leave us or they had to go off and do something. And I remember just being in the backyard and like our gate would like open and close by itself. And I always just like would get really freaked out and I freaked my own self out, just wondering and maybe if I were to go past that gate without them knowing, like what would happen to me, or would there be somebody waiting for me? And I don't know why that triggered my brain, but those things started coming to my head after I saw that rerun. And then at the time too, and it was just 2016, we had that kind of, I don't know, call it the clown epidemic, where people were dressing up as clowns and that was all over the news and people were like scaring just innocent people in parks and neighborhoods. And the ideas just started coming to me from all those three things. And that's kind of how like the script was banged out in even just a few days.
Wow. So, I
Yeah.
mean, you kind of said a lot there to follow up on. Homelessness. You said we.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, there was a band of artists that I had met after my buddy and I moved to Los Angeles, and we just all got very close. And, we sadly had to leave an apartment for, like, various reasons, and the place that we got wasn't gonna be ready for another month, so we just kind of lived around Los Angeles for a month until it was ready, and it was kinda some of the most fun as parts of my life, honestly. Like, it was just kinda like we didn't know what was gonna happen next. We were writing this script, and we were trying to, like, all kind of figure out how we were gonna do it. And so even the way that it looks to me is still to this day like magical, because you would not believe the nightmares we went through to get it made, you know?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do believe it. Really. It's tough, making a short film that's, visually, on point, and, the story, the narrative, the acting is on point as well. Um, what the other thing, to follow up there is like, okay, so, you were left alone as a child, and, there's, I think that is, you can see that with the main character in the movie, the early childhood. She's at the birthday party, she's alone there.
Exactly, exactly.
And, so there's definitely that connection. Interesting. Then moving on to themes, how do you see what do you see as the message of the movie or the theme of the movie now from your perspective?
It's funny, I mean, and yeah, all these years later, it's like I keep telling myself that, it's up to us to face our own fears, and it's kind of sad because I know she actually did the right Penny did the right thing by trying to find help for herself, and sadly, someone did take advantage of that, and I didn't wanna, like, I didn't wanna scare people into, like, finding help, but at the same time, I think also, my thought is that she was such a later in her life too, so I kept wondering is, like, learning how to face her fears and learning how to overcome them in, like, the most even if it takes such a crazy way, it's learning how to kinda, like, face our own, like, nightmares, whether that comes from inside or getting help from somebody else. But I guess what it's funny, like, at the time too, I was trying to scare people, so it's so strange, like, I'm like, "Oh my god, did I send a bad message or did I not?" So that's it's just funny looking years back, I was like, "Wow, that probably wasn't the best message, but I hope it scared a lot of people?" Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think that's cool that, you're looking at the message and what you're putting out. I think that's really important, for anybody, and what we're doing in life as,
Yeah,
filmmaking or
yeah,
not. So watching the movie
yeah.
and doing my homework on it and coming up with my interpretation of it
Please.
is, you know, her attempt at facing her fear and overcoming the violence that was perpetuated or perpetrated on her failed. And the reason it failed ultimately, I mean, failed in the sense that she became violent herself and an aggressor, and it failed um, because she identified and continued that level of violence. Now, it's interesting because if that is the storyline or the theme or what happened, it leaves this underlying question: well, how do you overcome trauma?
Exactly, and yeah, and man, looking at it that way, it's not exactly hopeful, but and then thinking about it now too, I think at the time I had gone through something really tragic, and I think at the time I remember like I was recommended like hey, you probably talk to someone about this, and I don't know what it was. Again, this is just my brain the way it thinks. I remember sitting there, I'm in a session for something that I should be, like, trying to cure my own self of, and all I could think in my head was, "This person could really, like, tell me anything that could twist my, like, view of," and not even in a negative way. This person was wonderful, and they were very helpful, but again, it was just a scary story. I'm always constantly thinking of ways to, like, twist things around, if that makes any sense?
Well, I think what you're saying
Yeah,
is that you found yourself in a really vulnerable position where this person
yeah,
could influence the way you think about your own
100%.
self. I think what happens, in all of us, like, okay, so there's that genre of, of thriller horrors that like are exciting and fun, but then there's the message and what's going on. And so what I kind of, to refine what I said is that I think in how it relates to the world at large and humanity is that, hey, a lot of people make that wrong decision of, trying to identify with their aggressor, and they continue the violence on their own children or on their own partners
Absolutely,
as they grow up. So how do you stop that level of violence? Because in real life, that shit is, there's nothing thrilling about it. If that indeed is, that's there in the movie as a story, then at least it's a warning to say, hey, this isn't the way. And then
yeah,
maybe part
yeah.
2, the feature that you're working on is like, "Hey, well, what is the way?" What is the way people get out of that awful, awful trauma? Um, so what do you think?
Well, it's weird because, again, like it was the first thing they ever made, and it's so funny, like little life experiences, even though they weren't completely connected. Like I just realized more and more as I kind of look back, like wow, all those things were in there, and I was a very different person at the time too, right? And since then, I think I become a lot better in handling a lot of my grief and trauma, and it's just so scary because in a treatment we had written for a feature for it at one point, it's like it's Penny kind of running around dressed as a clown, and she kinda essentially becomes Poppy the clown, you know? She
Yeah,
becomes the thing that she's afraid of the most,
yeah.
and it has to even kinda come down from that? And so, I'm just it's like looking at myself now, I'm glad that I didn't become what she would become, in the future, if that makes any sense,
It does. It makes
Yeah,
complete sense, and I think that's in an interesting way where I get really excited about talking to filmmakers and their films is like where the life mirrors what their work is, and it's like, "Hey, man,
100%.
that movie was in my view, that was how you faced your fears."
100%,
you know, and
man.
how you worked to overcome them. So leading us to the question, last question, play it forward, is you said it yourself, you were a different person then. How have you been changed since making the movie?
Well, as a person, like, I found healthier ways to, you know, deal with things that that are hurting us inside, like whether it's being more open with your friends and or your family, and like not being afraid to, like, when you're down, to like really talk to somebody. Also other people, and not being afraid to kind of like tackle those hurdles of whenever we're going through kind of deep changes in our life, or dark moments. And it's weird because it's like a lot of the things I've been writing since then are a lot more hopeful endings. Everything I've been kind of, even though it's always a nightmare that our protagonist is going to go through, I've always noticed that there's always hope at the end. And I think that's something that, as an artist, that I've grown, is that if I'm going to make horror movies, I don't want people to feel like that there's no hope from the nightmares that we're going to face in this world. So that's something that I noticed that's been changing consistently in the writing, especially with this upcoming feature that we're working on. Is that I was like, wow, like this needs to have a message of like you can get through the worst possible outcomes. And so I think that's how I've grown as a person, and as a filmmaker as well. Uh-oh.
Mitchell Slan, writer, director, Balloon. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. And I loved speaking to you. Thank you so much for being here, man.
Dude, thank you so much for having me, my friend. And a shout out to Regina for bringing me on and getting
Regina
to meet you.
Ainsworth, thank you.
Yeah, dude,
Yep,
she's the best.
nominated you. Thank you so much. All right, till next time, everybody, play it forward. Bye.